Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today for this chat regarding the differences between Ashtanga and Vinyasa Yoga. This is a question that I'm asked pretty often, and I also see it floating around in certain Facebook groups or whatever. And the question, really is just that. What is the difference between Ashtanga and Vinyasa Yoga? And I think that to answer that question, we have to first really start to understand what vinyasa means. So what does vinyasa mean? What does it mean to you? I mean, if you practice yoga regularly, you probably use that term a lot. And it means something even a little bit more specific in the context of Ashtanga yoga. We say that word, vinyasa, vinyasa, take a vinyasa. But again, it's not very meaningful unless you really kind of get the gist behind the word. So feel free to pipe in at all in this conversation if you want to drop anything in the comments. And until then, I will just keep going. But when we break down the word vinyasa, the prefix of the word vi, that means advancement, or you could say that is an intensification. And the root of the word nyas translates as to put or to place. So when you combine that together, vinyasa, you get a meaning that's something along the lines of to place something in a special way, or like a ritualized way would be a good way of putting that. So basically any set of actions done in a prescribed order. Now, so you can see how that makes sense in our Ashtanga practice, but I'll get to that in a second. A vinyasa could also be so many different things. It could be your morning ritual. Like if you get up a certain way, wake up, take your dog for a walk, have a cup of coffee, do a meditation practice, do a yoga practice. That could be a morning ritual. Light a candle, that type of thing. But one of my favorite examples is the ritual of worship in Indian temples. And the first time I went to India, I was quite fascinated with the different ways that people worshipped in temples. Like, to somebody who, as an outsider, it looked kind of really, really different. So I went to Catholic school. I grew up going to Catholic church. And, it's a lot of kind of organized there, standing up, sitting down, standing up, sitting down. But in India, it's, there's people circumambulate through the temple, and there's doing this over candles and placing flowers. And it's all very ritualized. And that is also a vinyasa. But in the context of Ashtanga yoga, vinyasa would be the way the asanas are placed. So we see this in Ashtanga because Ashtanga is a fixed sequence. And there's several different series, but you basically do the same thing every day in a prescribed way. And there is a very precise way that you are meant to enter and exit a pose. So literally in the Ashtanga method, every breath is counted. And that's kind of what we mean by vinyasa in Ashtanga, that prescription for going into and exiting a posture, the inhale, the exhale, the precise count, linking everything together. And of course, the postures are repetitive, right? And what I mean by repetitive, and feel free to pipe in if you have anything to comment on here, but what I mean by repetitive is it's accumulation of poses. You don't all of a sudden one day do all these poses and then revisit them 6 months later. And I think that's what I like so well about the Ashtanga practice, is that you kind of get a sense, what's coming next, and at least, on most days, what's coming next. But it feels different all the time. And I think that really illustrates that it's the person who's changing. It's not so much the practice. And I know, of course, the practice, you adapt it, it changes. There's some variance, of course, but mostly I think the vinyasa really highlights how much we change as people. how on a day-to-day basis, our bodies feel different, our breath feels different, we feel different in our body. And I think that that really is one of the really beautiful things about the vinyasa in the Ashtanga system, because it's repetitive, because you know what is coming next. It illustrates that the thing that's actually changing is the person. And there's, there's more to it. And again, if you have a comment on that, pipe in. But the Ashtanga sequences are logical in ways that may take a really long time to realize. Like, you might not quite get the logic behind it. It's not exactly like you're working up to some like apex pose in a series. It's much more subtle than that. And again, like coming back to that repetition, because I think that is really one of the things that makes Ashtanga unique. And it makes Ashtanga really valuable, not only because it shows that you change, but also because it gives you a chance to get better at the pose. And often that, is demonstrated by how you change. Like all of a sudden you can do something that you couldn't do 3 weeks ago. But it gives you a chance to get good at it, to get proficient at it, to get comfortable with something. And then in comparison, I will make an attempt to talk about Vinyasa Yoga, which, huge disclaimer, I haven't taken a Vinyasa Yoga class for quite a while. So Vinyasa also refers to a style of yoga. And in my understanding anyways, basically it's really similar to an Ashtanga in that it's characterized by linking postures to breath and linking postures in movement to breath. And it's also similar in that transitions are very important in Vinyasa Yoga. I mean, that's a big emphasis of the flow of a sequence is the breath, the transition. So it's similar in that way. But the sequence is created by the teacher. It's decided by the teacher. So the teacher might have some kind of goal of the sequence in mind, or the teacher might have, often teachers kind of avoid their weaknesses and they teach what they're comfortable with. So I think that that is really kind of a flaw of a Vinyasa Yoga class. And then the other flaw of it, and again, obviously super opinionated by somebody who's been practicing Ashtanga for a long time, but the other flaw of it is that I'll give you a couple other differences. Like you don't necessarily ever do the same sequence again twice. So how do you get good at something if you don't practice it again? I mean, I would consider that a flaw, although I bet you some people really like that. It depends on what the sequence is, right? But with Vinyasa, it's kind of, it might incorporate a lot of the same postures that you would see in Ashtanga, but the order of the postures is different, and often the tempo is different. The teacher leads the group through the flow, but the postures are ordered by the teacher at the discretion of the teacher. Maybe there's a goal, maybe there's a theme. Those are all legit, but also maybe the teacher could just as easily be avoiding something that they don't want to do or aren't comfortable teaching. So there's not a set sequence, and there's not necessarily a specific order. And I think that those things are one of the things that make Ashtanga so awesome, is that there is a set sequence, and that means it's not at the discretion of the teacher, because I did used to teach Vinyasa flow classes. I taught those for a long time. And, I often just kind of taught what I felt comfortable teaching, or I taught to, I'll look around the room. Okay, these people all look pretty strong. We'll do a harder class, or these people all look like tired. We're going to do something restorative. So in that sense, it was, you can kind of direct the class that you're teaching to the people you have in front of you. But for sure, somebody always gets left out, right? Like somebody always gets left out of that. It's impossible to teach to everyone in the class. You can kind of take the average, but you can't teach to everyone in the class. But you can in Mysore. You do in Mysore. It is individualized to the person in the group. So you very much can make it personal. And I think that that's a really important distinguishing factor of Ashtanga. But aside from all of this, let me just tell you something Tim Miller said to me a long time ago. He said, I think we're really the context was, we were asking about, vinyasa classes or whatever, flow classes. This was during a teacher training. And he said, I think we're kidding ourselves if you think that somebody could put together a better sequence than Patabi. And so I'm paraphrasing, I'm shortening it. But if you think of the average yoga teacher, I hate to say it, but like the bar's pretty low these days. I've been seeing loads of teacher trainings advertised on the internet. Like, it's something, right? Like, you can learn that way. I teach that way. You can definitely learn that way. But to really become a yoga teacher, you have to be ensconced in the experience. You have to internalize it. You have to practice it for years because the information is in the experience. And so I think often when you're looking at like your run-of-the-mill vinyasa class that you might take at the gym or something, there are some really inexperienced teachers, and that's okay. There's no shame in that. Like, you learn by doing. You've got to start somewhere. But to leave it to an inexperienced yoga teacher to design a sequence that is supposed to lead the student to some big transformation, that's a lot of work. That's a lot to ask of a teacher. And so I do think that's really one of the beauties of the Ashtanga system is, one, you don't get to leave out bits that you don't like, and your teacher doesn't get to leave out bits that they don't like either. You can modify it. Maybe sometimes you skip, of course. But, generally speaking, the sequence is what it is, and you work through it or some version of it. It's going to look different for everybody. I mean, I know that, and I teach that way. But, more or less, that's what it is. And the vinyasa in the Ashtanga sequence means that it's all placed in a certain order from start to finish. And every breath is counted for. And if you had a bunch of people starting at the same time and nobody teaching the group, it wasn't a led class, then it would look like pretty similar what they're all doing. And that's the vinyasa there. Whereas in Ashtanga, the vinyasa, if you were taking a vinyasa class, the vinyasa would look much different. And it would look different every time you took that class. And I think that, you can't individualize it as well. And there's self-practice available to everyone. But, Mysore is basically self-practice under the guidance of a teacher, which is huge. Really makes it in a great way to transform, to change your body, to change the way you think, to change the way you practice, to change your belief in yourself. So when we talk about Ashtanga and Vinyasa Yoga, they share these things in common: the emphasis on the breath, the transitions that connect the postures are basically as important as the posture. And both practices generate a lot of heat. And then if we want to talk about ways they differ, Ashtanga consists of set sequences, and the postures are typically taught one at a time or maybe in small groups at a time. Ashtanga is repetitive in nature, meaning you do the same series of postures day after day, and you accumulate postures over time, and you accumulate series over time. But, it happens gradually. You basically know what's coming. And in a Mysore practice, you set that tempo. But every movement has a corresponding breath and a count. And in Vinyasa Yoga, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily have a set sequence. Well, it doesn't have a set sequence unless it's set by the teacher. And the only thing permanent in Vinyasa Yoga is more that focus on the breath. And again, that the way the Ashtanga system is set up, it does encourage self-practice. And one of the most interesting things I think that we learn from the repetitive nature of Ashtanga is that it's the person who's changing, right? And that leads us to that whole bigger lesson of impermanence, like that big lifelong lesson of impermanence that we're all probably working on. I know I am, because everything changes. And we see that immediately in our practice. Like, that first sun salutation feels so much different than that last sun salutation. And I think the whole vinyasa, Ashtanga vinyasa system really also demonstrates how much we change. You know how it is. You might work so hard to try to recreate a really good practice that you had, and there's just no recreating it. No matter how you try, it's frustrating sometimes. You're like, oh, it felt so good yesterday and not today, and that's just the nature of it. So that's my little spiel on Ashtanga and Vinyasa Yoga. If you missed it, you can catch the replay. If you have anything, I'm going to hang on for another minute or two to see if any questions drop into the comments. I do have a couple of things coming up. I have a teacher development program starting in October. It's going to be really awesome. I'll post a link in the group for that later. And I also have a free challenge coming up beginning of October. And so you should all totally do that. It's going to be 5 days of live streams, about this length, like 10, 15 minutes. But I think it'll be good. It'll be super fun, and I hope that everyone will join me for that challenge. But consider the teacher development program also if you're a teacher. It really is about developing skills as a teacher, not so much and kind of coming over that fear of teaching, because that takes a while to get over. But I don't see any questions, so I'm going to sign off. I appreciate you all tuning in. This is my first time using StreamYard. I don't know how it worked on your end. I think it worked pretty well on my end. There's a little bit more of a lag. But you can also comment and let me know if you like StreamYard or just a straight up live stream, because I'm open. All right. Have a great weekend. Take care.